The trust fund kid who called my court a waste of time. Big mistake. I once had to choose between teaching a young man respect and letting him believe money makes you untouchable. If this story matters to you, please hit that subscribe button right now. I need to reach people who still believe character counts for something. Let me tell you about a case that made me question how we're raising the next generation and what values we're passing down. This decision would teach me as much as it taught him. Let me take you back to that day in Providence, Rhode Island. It was a Friday morning in late April. Beautiful spring day outside. Sun shining, birds singing, the kind of morning that makes you grateful to be alive. I walked into the courthouse feeling good, you know. My wife Rosa had made me breakfast. We'd laughed together. I'd said my morning prayers. I thought it would be a regular day of helping people work through their problems. Comment below if you've ever had a morning that started peaceful and became something you'd never forget. The courtroom was filling up with the usual Friday crowd. People who'd taken time off work to deal with traffic tickets and small violations. I could see tired faces from people who'd worked all night. I could see worried faces from folks who couldn't afford their fines. But I could also see determined faces, people ready to take responsibility and do the right thing. Most people who come into my courtroom are good people who made mistakes. They show up. They show respect. They try to make things right. Share this video with someone who understands that showing up with humility matters more than showing up with excuses. Then I saw the name on my docket, Brandon Whitmore, age 23, charged with reckless driving, open container in a vehicle, and resisting arrest. When I read the police report, my stomach turned. He'd been pulled over doing 70 miles per hour in a residential neighborhood at 2 in the morning. Windows down, music blaring, beer bottle in the cup holder. When the officer asked him to step out of the vehicle, he laughed and said, "Do you know who my father is? Turn on notifications because what happened when he walked into my courtroom will show you what happens when privilege meets accountability." When Brandon Whitmore walked in, I noticed everything. The designer clothes, probably cost more than most people in that courtroom made in a month. The watch, some luxury brand I couldn't even pronounce. The haircut that probably cost $200. The sunglasses pushed up on his head even though we were indoors. But what struck me most was his attitude. He walked in like he was doing us a favor, like this was all beneath him, like he had better places to be. Tell me in the comments, have you ever met someone who acted like the world revolved around them? His lawyer stood up first, expensive lawyer, big firm downtown, the kind that charges $500 an hour. She started talking about how Brandon was a college student, good family, bright future, made a mistake. She emphasized that his family was prominent in the community, that his father was a successful businessman, that this was out of character for Brandon. Like any of that should matter to me. I want to hear from you. Should a person's family or money affect how we apply the law? Drop your answer in the comments below. Then Brandon Whitmore stood up, and before he even opened his mouth, I could tell this wasn't going to go well. He sighed, like he was bored, like being in my courtroom was an inconvenience he had to endure. He looked at his lawyer, not at me, and he said, "Can we speed this up? I have plans this afternoon. Can we speed this up?" Not, "I'm sorry, Your Honor." Not, "I made a mistake." Can we speed this up? Please do me a favor and like this video so more people can see what real accountability should look like, because what happened next tested every ounce of patience I had. I looked at Brandon and I said, "No, Mr. Whitmore, do you understand why you're here today?" He shrugged, actually shrugged at me. He said, "Yeah, some cop pulled me over for going a little fast. I wasn't hurting anyone. It was 2 in the morning. The streets were empty. This whole thing is ridiculous. This whole thing is ridiculous." I felt my jaw tighten. I said, "Wait, what about the open container?" He laughed. He said, "Your Honor, it was 1 beer. I wasn't even drinking it while driving. It was just in my car. This is such a waste of time. Honestly, I could be studying right now." Stay with me because I'm about to tell you what went through my mind when he called my courtroom a waste of time. Waste of time. Those words hit me like a punch. You know what bothered me most? It wasn't even the reckless driving. It wasn't even the beer. It was the complete lack of understanding that his actions had consequences, that laws exist for a reason, that this courtroom represents something bigger than his afternoon plans, that respect matters. Join me on this journey. Subscribe so we can talk about what happens when entitlement meets justice. Let me tell you about another case I had that same morning. I need you to understand the difference between someone who makes a mistake and someone who just doesn't care. About an hour before Brandon walked in, I had a young woman named Jennifer in my courtroom. She was 24 years old, single mother, worked at a grocery store. She'd been cited for an expired registration, $35 fine. Before I continue, let me know in the comments if you think judges should consider someone's circumstances when hearing cases. Jennifer stood before me and she was shaking. Actually shaking, she said, "Your Honor, I'm so sorry. I know my registration expired. I got the notice. I just didn't have the money to renew it. I had to choose between that and buying medicine for my daughter. She has asthma. I chose the medicine. I know that's not an excuse. I broke the law. I'm here to take responsibility. I can pay $10 a month if you'll let me. I promise I'll get it renewed as soon as I can." Share this with anyone who's ever had to make impossible choices between paying bills and following rules, because Jennifer showed me what real character looks like. You know what I did? I looked at Jennifer and I saw someone trying their absolute best with very little. I saw someone who understood consequences, someone who showed respect, someone who was accountable. I said, "Jennifer, here's what we're going to do. I'm dismissing this fine. You go renew that registration as soon as you're able. Take care of your daughter. And Jennifer, the fact that you showed up here today, the fact that you told me the truth, the fact that you're trying so hard, that matters. Bless your heart, you're doing a good job." She cried. She actually hugged me. She said, "Thank you, Your Honor. God bless you." Turn on those notifications so you never miss stories about people who deserve compassion and people who need accountability. So when Brandon Whitmore stood in front of me an hour later, calling my courtroom a waste of time, rolling his eyes, talking about his afternoon plans, I thought about Jennifer. I thought about the difference between struggling and entitled. I thought about the difference between taking responsibility and acting like rules don't apply to you. I thought about what my father, God rest his soul, used to tell me. He'd say, "Frank, character is what you do when you think no one important is watching." Comment below. Who taught you about character and respect? The prosecutor presented the evidence, dashboard camera footage from the police car. You could see Brandon's car flying down a residential street, houses on both sides, families sleeping, kids' toys in yards. Speed limit was 25. He was doing 70. 70 miles per hour where children live and play. The video showed the officer pulling him over, showed Brandon laughing when he got out of the car, showed the beer bottle visible in the cup holder, then showed Brandon refusing to cooperate, demanding to call his father, telling the officer he was making a huge mistake. Tell me in the comments, at what point does youthful mistake become dangerous arrogance? His lawyer tried to minimize it. She said Brandon had never been in trouble before, that he was young, that he'd learned his lesson. But I asked Brandon directly. I said, "Mr. Whitmore, have you learned a lesson from this?" He looked at me like I'd asked the stupidest question in the world. He said, "Your Honor, I learned to be more careful about where I drive fast and to put beer in the trunk instead of the cup holder." That's what he said. More careful about where he drives fast. Not I learned not to endanger people. Not I learned to respect the law. More careful about where he drives fast. If you're feeling the same frustration I felt, please share this video with someone who needs to hear it. I sat there looking at Brandon Whitmore, and I felt something I rarely feel in my courtroom. I felt genuine anger, not the hot kind that makes you yell, the cold kind that makes you very, very clear about what needs to happen. Here was a young man with every advantage in the world: money, education, opportunity, a family who could afford a $500 an hour lawyer. And he was using all those advantages to avoid taking responsibility for endangering people's lives. Join me, subscribe, and let's talk about what we owe each other as members of a community. But part of me wanted to show mercy. That's who I am. My father worked 3 jobs sometimes to give us a better life. He cleaned office buildings at night so I could go to law school. He taught me compassion. He taught me that everyone deserves a chance. And I've given thousands of second chances in my 40-some years on this bench. People who showed remorse, people who understood they'd messed up, people who wanted to do better. But Brandon Whitmore wasn't showing me any of that. He was showing me contempt. and I had to decide what message to send. Thank you for being here with me. Your support helps me share these important lessons about justice and fairness. I thought about what would happen if I let Brandon pay a small fine and walk away. What would I teach him? That he was right, that money and family connections do put him above the rules, that calling a courtroom a waste of time has no consequences, that endangering lives is just a minor inconvenience if you can afford a good lawyer. What would I teach Jennifer, who'd been in my courtroom that same morning, treating a $35 expired registration citation with more respect than Brandon was showing for reckless endangerment? What would I teach every other young person watching? Comment below. What would you have done if you were sitting where I was? The courtroom was completely silent. I could hear the air conditioning humming. I could hear people breathing. Every eye in the room was on me, waiting. The gallery had filled up. Word must have spread that something interesting was happening. I could see elderly people who'd lived in Providence their whole lives. I could see parents. I could see young people Brandon's age. They were all watching to see if justice meant something or if money talked louder. Wait until you hear what I decided to do, but first tell me, do you believe wealth should influence justice? I closed my eyes for just a moment. I actually prayed right there on the bench. I said, God, help me do what's right. Help me be fair but firm. Help me teach this young man something his father apparently never did. When I opened my eyes, I knew exactly what I had to do. This wasn't about punishment. This was about teaching a lesson that might save this kid's life or someone else's life down the road. Before I tell you my exact words, I need you to turn on notifications so you don't miss how this story ends. I straightened my back. I looked directly at Brandon Whitmore, and I began to speak. My voice was calm, measured, but absolutely firm. I said, Mr. Whitmore, you called my courtroom a waste of time. You stood here and showed no remorse for driving 70 miles per hour through a neighborhood where families sleep and children play. You laughed about having an open container in your vehicle. You told me you learned to be more careful about where you drive fast. So let me teach you something about waste of time. Stay with me because what I said next changed his whole attitude. Subscribe so you never miss stories about teaching respect to people who think they're above it. I continued, you're going to find out what a real waste of time feels like. I'm fining you the maximum penalty allowed by law. That's $1,000 for the reckless driving, $500 for the open container, $250 for resisting arrest. That's $1,750 total. I heard his lawyer start to speak, but I raised my hand. I wasn't finished, not even close. I said, furthermore, I'm suspending your driver's license for 6 months, not 3 months, not 30 days, 6 months. His face changed. The smirk disappeared. Now he was paying attention. Good. Tell me in the comments, do you think taking someone's license is too harsh for reckless driving? But I still had more to say. I said, Mr. Whitmore, you're also going to complete 150 hours of community service, and I'm choosing where you'll serve those hours. You're going to volunteer at the trauma center at Rhode Island Hospital. You're going to meet people whose lives were changed forever by reckless drivers. You're going to see what happens when someone thinks going 70 in a residential neighborhood is no big deal. You're going to learn what a real waste of time looks like, the time spent in hospitals recovering from injuries that could have been prevented if people like you had an ounce of respect for others. If you believe consequences should teach lessons, not just punish, share this video right now. I continued. And here's the final part. You're going to write a letter, not your lawyer, you, in your own handwriting. You're going to write to me explaining what you learned from this experience. And you're going to write letters of apology to the police officer you disrespected and to every resident on the street where you were driving 70 miles per hour. I want you to knock on their doors, look them in the eyes, and apologize for endangering their families. You have 90 days to complete all of this. I could see his face turning red. His jaw was tight. The arrogance was gone. Finally, join our community. Subscribe and let's support each other in holding people accountable regardless of their bank accounts. His lawyer stood up, her voice sharp. Your Honor, this is excessive. My client is a student. He needs his license to get to school. He has obligations. We request that the court reconsider these harsh penalties. Harsh, she called them harsh. I looked at her and I said, Counselor, your client called my courtroom a waste of time. He showed zero remorse for endangering lives. He laughed about breaking the law. These penalties aren't harsh. They're appropriate. They're designed to teach your client something his family's money apparently hasn't taught him, that actions have consequences, that respect matters, that other people's lives matter as much as his afternoon plans. This ruling stands. Thank you for sticking with me through this story. If it's making you think, please like this video. The courtroom erupted in applause. People actually started clapping. I had to quiet everyone down, but I kept my eyes on Brandon Whitmore. I wanted to see if any of this was sinking in. His face had gone from arrogant to shocked to something else. Maybe embarrassment, maybe anger, maybe, and I hope this was true, maybe the beginning of understanding, but he didn't say a word. He just stood there. His lawyer gathered her papers. She whispered something to him. He nodded. Then he turned and walked out. Still didn't apologize. Still didn't show remorse. Just walked out. Turn on notifications because I'm about to tell you what happened 3 months later, and you won't believe it. Walking to my car that evening, I felt completely drained. When you make a decision that public, that firm, that definitive with someone so young, it weighs on you. I kept